So if you go to dmh.mo.gov, that is the Department of Mental Health standard webpage. If you click on developmental disabilities at the top, um, and scroll down to community supports, there's a little star here and it says intake and eligibility. So this is where you're going to find any information about our assessments. Once you click on that, it's going to explain eligibility information. And as you scroll down, you'll see a little section that says the assessment process. If you click on that little arrow, there's information on how to schedule that assessment that's pretty specific to support coordinators. But then there's also this MOS reference guide, which is going to be really good information for parents, individuals, families, guardians, and support coordinators to learn a little bit more. So this is going to be your table of contents. But what's most important right here and what I'm going to go over is kind of the purpose and what the MOS actually is. So the MOS reference guide really is to provide additional information and explain what the MOS is. So that was the whole purpose behind this. If you scroll down, it'll talk about eligibility requirements. This is specific for the division. I'm guessing that most of these people probably have already been found eligible and now are wanting to get funded services. So I'm going to skip through this information. But the MOS history, what is the MOS? Why was it created? Who created it? So this began in 2015. Dr. Clay Stearns, who worked for the Division of Developmental Disabilities for several years in the Department of Mental Health, he made this kind of his mission and his goal to develop an adaptive assessment that meets state, federal, diagnostic criteria and just be standardized and used by the state of Missouri. So he worked with State University and other subject matter experts, and it took several years. They did a lot of statistical analysis, and essentially they developed the MOS. One of the things that they did do, and you may have heard of Neil Harms, he also assisted with the development and creation of the MOS. He's one of my predecessors and was a former intake and assessment director as well. So one of the things that's very important to know about the MOS is that it is not only an adaptive assessment, but it also takes over as our priority of need scoring, or that PON. So basically, whenever you are making a funding request, we determine from this assessment where you fall in line as far as what the priority of need is. So is your need greater or less than somebody else? The other thing that it also does is if you or an individual were receiving residential services, it determines their rate allocation score, or RAS. So essentially, how much money does it cost to provide the level of care that they require? And that's what that score is. Previous adaptive assessments that we used did not determine all of these factors. They only looked at adaptive functioning and determined functional limitations. So this assessment really did 3 assessments job in one. So that's one thing that's very important to remember is this assessment was specifically designed for Missouri and how we provide funding and what those requirements are. So the purpose of the MOS is to measure adaptive functioning in the 6 major life areas. So that's going to be learning, mobility, communication, self-care, self-direction, and independent living or economic self-sufficiency. This is just going to go over what I talked about the priority of need and rate allocation score. Another very important thing to know about the MOS is that this has been credentialed. This has been tested. It's been norm referenced. It is statistically sound and very, very strong assessment. It's very comparative to the Vineland Adaptive Assessment, as well as the ABOS. So we do know that this is validity of this is very strong. And that's one of the questions that we often get is, you know, why did we create our own when they're already out there? It's truly because this one assessment takes place of 3 assessments that we would have previously had to do. The other thing that is very important to know, and I'm not going to go over all of this because you guys can definitely look at this and it'll provide you with much more information than I am about the specific what makes our assessment great versus some of the others. But one thing that I also want to mention is prior to the moss, the Mocabe was used as well as the Vineland. And so one thing that we kind of lost as a state whenever we were using the Mocabe and the Vineland is the ability to control who completes the assessment. So Mocabes were being completed by support coordinators across the state. And although we had pretty specific requirements as far as what an assessor needed to do and complete, a lot of times that would get lost. So somebody may not have gone through full credentialing before they were completing that Mocabe. So the state's kind of taken that back. And one of the things that they wanted to do was to make sure that these assessments were completed by qualified assessors. And so the MOS isn't completed by any private TCMs. It's not completed by any support coordinators across the state. It's completed by a group of less than 30 assessors that work throughout the state. The other thing is that this assessment is exclusively virtual. So that is completely different than what we've done in the past. So completely virtual means that there's no requirement to come into the office, to sit down face to face with someone, to have someone come into their home. This can be done over a smartphone, laptop, computer, tablet. We do ask that you have access to a camera in order to complete the assessment because the individual will have to perform a few tasks and answer some questions. And so they need to be visually seen by the assessor. But that also means that you could be completing the assessment with somebody who is not familiar with the area you live in. For example, I'm in the northwest corner of Missouri, and it would be very, very common for me to have an assessment completed by an assessor who actually resides in St. Louis. So that also allowed us to have more flexibility throughout the state to allow some high population areas such as St. Louis to be supported by some lower population areas. So that's one of the cool things about this as well, is we're able to do a lot more with fewer staff. The credentialing in order to become an assessor is very extensive. They do quarterly checks to make sure that those assessors are completing the assessment to the degree required. So you're really getting very sound assessors who know what they're doing and can walk you through. And that's something that I think is very, very nice about this assessment as well. So that's kind of my brief overview and quick guide to this. I will make sure that this website gets sent out so you guys can just quickly reference it. And I think it will be able to answer several questions that you may have just about the assessment itself.